So guys, it has been a little while since we have checked in on PragerU. They're actually doing well in terms of viewership, but not so well in terms of the viewer response. This video from 3 weeks ago we're about to react to, called Sex is Binary, currently has 1 million views and 5.4 thousand likes, and obviously dislikes are hidden, but that is a not so good amount of likes for a video with that many views. Obviously, PragerU is likely botting a lot of their videos as well. They've got the money and resources to do that, so why wouldn't they? They don't have a soul. They don't have, like, morals or anything like that, so there's no downside for them. PragerU has famously, throughout all the times we've covered their content, been a channel that has reliably produced high volumes of lies in a very short span of time. It's genuinely, like, impressive, and it's like a trap that you'll get stuck in fact-checking every claim they make, determining it's a lie, and being like, nope, that is just a bald-faced lie. It's literally, you could Google it and see demonstrably what they're saying isn't true. And on a topic like this, I guarantee they're going to make a lot of straightforward claims without any actual anything to cite it. What I'm going to imagine this video will be, I have not watched this video at all. I have not pre-watched it in any way, shape, or form. Here's what I think this video will be. I think they're going to bring in a quack doctor. One of those doctors that's been laughed off the stage from the entire medical industry, who has basically decided to, abandon their job as a health care provider and instead basically pursue a job as a right-wing grifter. And instead of citing any actual sources, studies, or institutions that agree with their claims, they're just going to have a single doctor say, this is what I believe, and this is actually what all the rest of the medical industry believes, but we can't say it because the wokeness will cancel us out of being doctors, we'll just get canceled. That's going to be my guess, because that's pretty much every propagandistic video that goes along these lines. Let's see it. Also, by the way, several people who have acted as speakers on PragerU have literally spilled the beans about how this all works. There's no ambiguity or guesswork to be done. Hunter Avalone, who has spoken multiple times for PragerU, has literally talked about what they had him do. They gave him, like, a bunch of cue cards to read. He didn't even believe half the shit he was saying, but they gave him a paycheck. It was like $5,000 or $15,000, I believe, and they gave him cue cards. He read them, and a couple months later, they put out a video, and they had his endorsement. That's literally what they do. That's all these videos are. They gave this, whoever's it's going to be talking, they gave this person cue cards, and they paid them off, and sent them on their way.
Asked to define the word woman during her Supreme Court confirmation hearings in 2022,
a person who identifies as a woman, or if you insist that you use a definition that does not use the word woman, instead, somebody who identifies with the gender identity that is most commonly associated with feminine characteristics. There you go.
Judge Ketanji Jackson famously demurred, saying, "I'm not a biologist." Well, I am a biologist, and I'm here to help. To that end, let me rephrase.
I knew it. I knew it. All right. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the backstory of this guy. Let's find out what this guy's backstory is. Colin Wright. The only thing that comes up about him that isn't just, like, here's his, like, IMDb or here's his, like, webpage is a story by a right-wing institution that says the following. This is back in 2020, so this is old news. That's why not a lot of stuff comes up. Evolutionary biologists forced out of academia for insisting male and female are not social constructs. He was on Joe Rogan. Yep, here he is. Yep, he's a conservative ex-doctor. Founding editor of At Real Last Stand, a publication dedicated to free speech, science, and reality. Quote, reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. Philip K. Dick. Fellow Manhattan Institution. Advisor. It's great cities, safe and free. Whiskey, fitness, cats, and ideas. He loves the high-level ideas. Oh, jeez. So yeah, he's been ousted out of academia a while ago. So if you guys are actually interested in why he was ousted out of academia, it's because when you're a doctor or a scientist, it's not unreasonable to disagree or to challenge already held beliefs. Like, for example, a very common practice in science, especially when you are going through schooling, is to test scientific laws and scientific theories and try to break them, try to prove them wrong. Obviously, you're not going to. You're peer reviewing very, very old research, but you're proving it to yourself and to your entire classroom that these fundamental laws exist. You're reproducing these things. And that is in and of itself a challenge to the already held norm. Every day, science students are challenging scientific laws and scientific theories by testing them in the classroom. But every time they test them, they're re-strengthened, right? There's a difference between making a clear, concise effort to challenge an idea in science because you are trying to come to the truth of something and trying to do it because you have a political bias. And there are a lot of people who, just because they're doctors or scientists, are not immune to political bias, both on the left and the right. And I do think that's concerning. This guy is one of those people. For quite some time now, surprisingly, the scientific consensus has been that not only that sex and gender are not the same thing, and this is agreed upon by, countless medical organizations, from the United Nations National Health Service, I believe the American Medical Health Association, the American Pediatrics Health Association, the American Human Rights Campaign. I could literally go on. I'm just wrapping off the brain here, but that has been recognized for a while now. But specifically in regards to sex, biological sex, it has been agreed upon that that is not binary, as in there are only two, male and female, for a while now. You can look at articles from, I believe the Scientific American has a really big article on this that is a massive just statement with a bunch of studies kind of put together. But the current consensus right now is that gender and sex are not the same thing, and that sex itself is not binary. That's literally the overwhelming consensus. The current view of it is that sex is more of a bimodal distribution. So on one end, you've got most of the population falling on the more male or masculine end of things. And then on the other end, you've got most of the population, obviously most of half of the population, falling on the more feminine side of things. But then you've got people that very much don't fit in with that fall somewhere in the center or far on, either extreme. A good example of this are people who are intersex. There's actually a good graphic I might be able to find. Intersex chromosome chart. So for quite some time now, we've been quite familiar. This is from the Scientific American. This is visualizing sex as a spectrum by the Scientific American, and this is a graphic they made specifically to help understand this. It's way more complicated than a binary. Basically, you've got on this end of things, this is literally incomprehensible to us. It's so complicated. The fact is that literally no one here, and certainly no YouTubers or people getting paid by PragerU to read off cue cards, are actually genuinely qualified enough to understand this shit. This is very complicated. And the way that this data and this chart bears out in reality leads to things such as some people are born with a dick and balls, go to the hospital one day in their 30s to get an x-ray or an MRI or whatever, and the doctor's like, sir, you have a uterus. That just kind of happens. You've got a uterus and ovaries, bro. You got a dick and balls and you have your entire life, but you've got a uterus and ovaries too. And you never know. There is there is some pretty substantial fuckery that nature has to offer. Unfortunately, reality is not set in stone. There is not a what there's supposed to be. What is common, what is ubiquitous, is not how it is supposed to be. Conservatives have a very unscientific tendency to ascribe meaning to reality. There is no meaning to reality. This guy is demonstrating the fact that he is a bad scientist simply by implying that he thinks there is meaning in there supposing to be a male and female sex, and that's it. But yeah, this guy's been ousted from academia for a while now because he's just kind of taken a political side against the current scientific consensus. He has no actual, data or any evidence using the scientific method that it was gathered through to challenge it or anything. He's just trying to grift off a career. You can see it in his dead eyes. Look at his dead eyes and his, mannequin doll plasticky face.
Raise the question to Judge Jackson. Are sex categories in humans, male and female, real, immutable, and binary, or are they merely social constructs? Answer:
So, they're not going to explain what social construct means. Something you need to recognize about these videos is that they'll say a common buzzword that's oftentimes used by lefties without at least doing their due diligence and explaining what it means. A social construct does not mean it is not real. Something being a social construct does not mean it's not real. Let's take language, for example. Language is a social construct, but it is still real. Meaning, we made up language. It is a construct of our social interaction that we made up for the sake of communication, to make it easier. In that same way, we often refer to gender as a social construct, because prior to the existence of gender roles, we just kind of had sex. Well, we definitely had sex, but we also just had, sex that we could see, obviously, and that would kind of, oh, look, the people with the vaginas and the titties are typically smaller and weaker, and the guys with the dicks and the balls are typically bigger and stronger. I wonder how we ought to divvy up our, jobs in our caveman society, and that's more likely than not how gender expectations started. We socially constructed it because it made society easier. Pronouns. He, she, her, they, them, it, its, all of these are words that we developed to make communication easier. They weren't, carved into our brains by God. We weren't born knowing how to speak. We were taught how to speak by other people, by our parents usually, our grandparents, whoever your guardian was. So that is what we mean when we say something is a social construct. Not that it's simply not real, which is what conservatives will often strawman that into meaning.
Real. That's just the way it is, and we all know it. Immutable. It can't be changed. And binary. There are only two sexes, not 3 or 4 or 57. This is true throughout the plant and animal kingdoms. An organism's sex is defined by the type of gamete, sperm or ova, it can or would produce.
So, conservative messaging on this issue is no different than it has always been on the issue of climate change. Since the 80s, conservatives have put billions of dollars into pushing misinformation disguised to look like it's coming from a reliable scientist out to the public in order to keep their narrative that climate change isn't real, it's not affected by humans, and they don't need to do anything about it going. They're doing the same thing on this issue. The overwhelming majority of the scientific community has already settled on this issue, and there is a lot of money in convincing people not to believe what the scientists are saying. We did it with conservatism, or not conservatism, well, yeah. We did it with climate change denial for literal decades. Literally 99.7% of scientists pretty much have been saying climate change driven by humans is real and we need to do something about it for over a decade, for decades. And conservatives are still pushing the idea that it's all made up and successfully getting people to believe it. The people who watch this drivel and believe it are a lot dumber than you may even give credit for.
Males have the function of producing sperm, or small gametes, and females ova, or large ones. There is no third gamete type. There are only two,
So this is so reductive that it just doesn't bear out in reality. I mean, that isn't how scientists break down biological sex. I've already demonstrated. Do I need to bring up more examples of what the scientific consensus is? Mind you, there are not going to be any citations. Let's look at the description. Here's the citations. We've got the script. They link the script and a link to their website where they have the script and another link to the script, their tags, and then a link to their website where you can... Do you know the truth about transgender ideology and, quote, gender-affirming care? Take the quiz and sign the petition to protect kids from harmful ideology here. And then a link to their website. But yeah, let's go ahead and look at some of the data on this issue. I'm busting out the ultimate research doc, because fuck it. Actually, you know what? Hold on. I can just let the king do it. Well, what? Here I am, wasting my breath, putting in all this hard work when I can just let the king of science do it. Allow me to introduce you all to the king of science on YouTube, Hank Green, on SciShow, with his video, Science Proves There Are More Than Two Human Sexes. Just straight up. Not to mention, by the way, if you want to get a look at their citations on this claim, that science proves there are more than two human sexes, on one of the most well-acclaimed science channels on all of YouTube, let's look at their description. Wow. Yeah. Image sources, too. They even have sources for their images. Here is literally all of the .edus and .govs and like scientific organizations and government institutions they're pulling their sources from. Literally this laundry list of different links that they've cited. Not a damn thing for PragerU other than self-promotion. I can't play much of this without it getting copyrighted because this is a large, like, reputable company run by PBS, public broadcasting station. But I'll play as much of it as I can without getting yeeted.
In high school biology, we usually learn that the sexes in humans are fixed and concrete. Whether you're male or female is black and white and rooted in your DNA. Your 23rd pair of chromosomes is either two X chromosomes or an X and a Y. That's it. End of story. And that's essentially what scientists thought too. But it turns out that sex isn't that straightforward. In fact, biologists today are saying sex is a spectrum, and the scientific community is still working on understanding and respecting the people who fall in the middle of that spectrum. To get this out of the way right up front, we're not talking about gender or sexuality here. Gender refers to social and cultural attributes and understandings of men and women and their roles, though not every culture has only two categories, and it's increasingly seen as a spectrum. Plus, the gender you identify as may or may not be the same one as what you express with things like your clothing and behavior, all of which can also be on a spectrum. Sexuality describes who you are attracted to, and it can be equally complicated and on a spectrum, and where you are on these spectrums isn't necessarily fixed. What we are talking about today is your biology, including your chromosomes, your hormones, your gonads, and your genitals. The catch is that these biological features don't always agree with each other. And they certainly don't always conform to those high school health class diagrams that tell us there's a single, universally correct pathway to being male and female. In fact,
well, he's about to go into a ton of statistics. Obviously, we went over all the citations and everything. This is an actual science video explaining the issue that is completely on its own. Its existence debunks this one. This guy's been laughed out of academia for pursuing the grift of right-wing dollars. But the fact that he has PhD in his name is all it takes for very dumb people to assume what he says without any sources or citations must be the truth. Because the doctor said it, so it must be true.
Therefore, sex is binary. This shouldn't be controversial. It's just basic biology.
Basic biology when advanced biology enters the room.
One of us is the result of a male and a female, our biological mom and dad, successfully reproducing. Sorry to make you think about that. Without the existence of males and females, I wouldn't be here right now.
You could tell how he's like stuttering with reading the cue cards, right? You can see like in the reflection of his glasses too. And it's why he's talking so slowly, is because he's reading.
And neither would you. Our species would have gone extinct long ago. Many gender activists, however, falsely assert that sex cannot be binary and must be viewed as a spectrum.
Isn't it funny how like every conservative bit of media has to focus on degrading those that disagree with them? Like, I oftentimes will read my comments, and there'll be a conservative who's like a fan of a conservative YouTuber I'm debunking, and they'll get really mad at me for insulting their favorite conservative YouTuber in the comments. Like, I was gonna watch your video, but then you called him a propagandist and said he was a demon, and you're clearly triggered. And it's like, okay, your favorite YouTubers are constantly shitting on the left. All of the most popular conservative content is shitting on and sending personal insults out towards lefties. So simply making not even an insulting claim, but a like opinion-based claim about the content made by your favorite YouTuber is too far. Like, they are the definition of dishing it out but not being able to take it. They will absolutely play the victim when insulted, and act like you've gone too far by being mean to their favorite conservative channel. But all of their favorite conservative content is about depicting the left like this. Like, we're mad, we're crazy gender activists.
Assert that sex cannot be binary and must be viewed as a spectrum because a very small number of people have genitalia that appear ambiguous or mixed. Phenomena.
This is one of their so obviously they can't ignore the fact that intersex people exist. This is where they start to do that thing I was talking about before with ascribing meaning to reality. They think that because most people are male or female, that must be how it's supposed to be. So you can just discount any exceptions to that because those are just mistakes or defects or glitches. They're not supposed to exist. And it's like, what? So he's acknowledging right now that there are people who have multiple sexes, genitals, and gonads and other sexual characteristics and whatnot, but they don't matter to our scientific evaluation of how sex works because we've decided they're mistakes and that's not how it's supposed to work. And so we just don't count them. It's like trying to argue that a number sequence is binary when there's some threes thrown into the ones and zeros, but you're like, but we're not counting the threes because they're typos. It's like, but that's still not a binary sequence. What are you talking about? You can't just ignore them and they just disappear. That's not how reality works. It's this desperation to ascribe meaning to the way things are that just is very unscientific. Scientists don't look for meaning in things. They look for why things are, not for meaning.
Known as intersex conditions. These ideologues claim the existence of such conditions renders the categories male and female meaningless. But intersex conditions don't.
There you go. He even outright said it, meaningless, because they ascribe so much meaning to these things. They think there is they're ideologues. They're well, obviously PragerU is a literal religious institution, so they're pushing conservative propaganda through religious ideology too. Pre-watched? No. As a college chemist, I can confirm what Xan said. I don't remember exactly what I said that you're confirming, but yes, most of what I say is very true. And most scientists would agree with everything I say. There is no meaning, there are only reasons. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that is very much true. I probably heard a scientist say that at some point, but I'm pretty sure that's off the dome.
Undermine the sex binary at all, because sex ambiguity is not a third sex. The existence of very rare borderline cases.
It's not that there's a third sex, it's that there's not even two. It's that there's an infinite number, potentially. If you look at it on a binary scale, a binary has a gradient with an infinite amount of points on it. That's how a binary or a bimodal distribution works. Like if you like a line, for example, has infinite amount of points on it in math. So yeah, that's I don't This is really stupid. I have to dumb myself down beyond like the shreds of schooling I remember from high school. I have to get down to like elementary school shit to engage with this.
No more raise questions about everyone else's sex than the existence of dawn and dusk cast doubt onto the existence of day and night.
Okay. You realize that there is also twilight, right? And that there are several areas of the day that we ascribe. There's the golden hour, which is a label that we have for the best time of day for taking photography. There's there's noon, high noon. Like, what kind of attempt at a comparison is this? Actually, time of day is a really good example. We've literally just given labels to certain brackets of time in the day, and time itself is also something we've socially constructed as our way of perceiving the passage of events, and our perception of it. But it's a perfect example. Like noon, like when you say it's afternoon, you're talking about 1 p.m. to like 5. Do you know how different it is at 5 p.m. compared to 2 p.m.? Like, it's practically sunset at 5 p.m. The sun's, like, all orange in the sky, and it's, like, the shadows are casted all long, and it's kind of dark if you go into the woods. So if you're someone who likes to go outside in the woods, it's already getting dark, and you need to set up camp. Like, there are, you know, very good reasons to break down times of day into different hours, and those hours into minutes, and those minutes into seconds, because as it turns out, reality is more complicated than the overly simplistic worldview these people have been paid billions of dollars, no doubt, in order to push to very stupid and ignorant people.
Our society isn't experiencing a sudden dramatic surge in people born with ambiguous genitalia. We're experiencing a dramatic surge in people who are unambiguously one sex, claiming to identify as the opposite sex.
So this is a completely different issue. Sneaky, sneaky, pseudo-scientific pieces of shit. So now, what they're claiming is that the rise in people identifying as transgender correlates somehow in a rise in... They're trying to claim that there's been a rise in people who are intersex by pointing to a graph. This is a made-up graph, by the way. Notice how there's, like, no markings on here. There's no citation. It's just... They do this a lot, where it's just a graph. Like, they've made graphs so it'll be the amount of communism in a country, and then the amount of happiness in a country, and then the amount of communism goes up, and the amount of happiness goes down. Like, they just do that all the time. It's one of the most PragerU tactics that there is. It's kind of nice we got to see an example of one in this video. But, no, this is if anything, this represents the amount of people coming out as transgender. This is a separate thing from, like, people who are intersex. Like Hank Green said at the beginning of his video, intersex, sexuality, and gender identity are not the same thing. Nice try.
Or some
Tried to sneak it past us, didn't you? As well as in regards to the rise in people identifying as trans in recent years, it's the same thing as people identifying as gay, and the same thing as with people identifying as left-handed. So left-handedness graph. You can literally see the same trend happened when gay marriage and gayness stopped being as looked down upon, and we're seeing the same phenomena today with trans people, and it's getting demonized. Prior to the 1900, we didn't really ban being left-handed. We didn't really we didn't have it banned from schools. We didn't have private school nuns like slapping the wrists of kids who were doing that. And it became way more normalized in around 1900, and it blasted off, and people were, probably fear-mongering about the rise of this statistic all through these years until it plateaued. Because guess what? There was always a set amount of left-handed people. There were only wavering statistics in the amount of people there were due to the fact that there was on and off amounts of either oppression or lack of oppression towards people with left hands or who were left-handed. The same goes for gay people, and the same goes for people who are trans. Eventually, these statistics will plateau because there's always been an amount of trans people. There's always been an amount of gay people. The only reason why these numbers fluctuate is based on whether or not trans or gay people feel safe enough to come out.
Something other than male or female altogether.
Also, we're really taking this video slow, so I'm going to speed it up a little.
Gender ideology seeks to portray sex as so incomprehensibly complex and multivariable that our traditional...
Imagine attempting to describe any scientific topic like this. Yes, theoretical physics attempts to make understanding how reality works so incomprehensible the layperson just can't understand it and can't grasp it. Like, this is the most desperate attempt to make someone dumber I've ever seen.
Practice of classifying people as either male or female is grossly outdated and should be abandoned for a revolutionary concept of gender identity. This new system holds that...
Well, gender identity is separate, but yes, you should respect people's gender identity.
Males shouldn't be barred from female sports, women's prisons, or other spaces previously segregated, so long as...
Ooh, I'm glad they're like lasering in on the Wedge issues that have the most anti-trans support. So on the vast majority of issues, people couldn't care less about like trans people being like respected and having rights. But when it comes to women's shelters for like domestic abuse or rape, women's sports and women's prisons, these are the weak points for trans rights, because obviously there's like the risk of like if you have a trans woman in a women's prison, there could be pregnancies. Obviously, I'm like, who gives a fuck, right? I don't care. There are rapings that happen in our normal prisons. I don't think our prisons should be a place that we just decided we're just gonna let rapings happen in. Like, why is that a thing? If you send a trans woman to a male prison, she's definitely going to get raped. So, like, why are we allowing the prisons to operate like this? We should completely overhaul our prison system. It should be completely different. It should be way better. I could go on about how we could improve that, but we don't have time for that stun lock. But Finland is a good place to pull from. That said, though, yeah, plus guards, too. Guards do a lot of raping. And female guards receive a lot of raping and, like, sexual harassment. If you're a female prison guard, oh boy, you get sexually harassed more than any woman on the planet. Yep. Yeah, you do. And obviously, when it comes to women's sports, there's like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of people participating in women's sports that are trans, and they're fear-mongering this. The funny thing as well is they've even instituted trans bans in chess. They keep on fear-mongering that it's for the safety of the women that are like competing, but they've done this in non-contact sports, in sports where there's no risk of like playing against a male being a physical threat, like chess. What advantage does a male have in chess? It's just a political fear-mongering thing. Thankfully, though, and this is borne out in data over and over again, this just doesn't bring people out to the polls. The Republicans wasted insane amounts of money on political ads in 2022 for the midterms. It did not bring people out. They lost hardcore with the amount of money they spent on anti-trans ads, and they're leaning even harder into it for 2024. Tons of their anti-trans bills are getting shot down in courts, even in Florida. A recent drag ban was shot down by the courts in Florida and ruled unconstitutional by the First Amendment. So it's just, none of this shit will stand. It's all a flailing attempt to try to take away the rights of a marginalized group with popular support that will never succeed no matter how much money they throw at it. Just like with every other issue, eventually the fact that people are not stupid. I joke about people being stupid often, but people are not stupid in that over the long term, people will find out the truth and the truth will prevail. It has on most issues throughout all of history. Only on the very short term have liars and cheats been running things and getting away with it. In the long term, justice is usually doled out and things get better. Look at the grand scale of history. Look at where we are now. Look at where we started. Things have gotten better. And they will continue to get better. No matter how much money these evil people throw at the truth to try to make it go away, it's not going to go away.
So long as they identify as female. But intersex and transgender mean entirely different things. Intersex...
Yeah, we know. You said that after trying to trick people into believing a graph that assumes it's not the case.
People have
We know.
extremely rare conditions that result in apparent sex ambiguity. Transgender people, however, aren't sexually ambiguous at all, but merely
Okay, so are we now ceding that intersex people are valid because they have apparent sex ambiguity? Also, there are intersex people who are trans, and yes, transgender is separate. So he starts off the first half of the video arguing a point, and then he's going to spend the last half of the video debunking that point?
they claim to identify as something other than their biological sex. Once you're conscious of this distinction, you'll begin to notice that gender activists attempt to steer discussions away from, for example, whether men who identify as women should be allowed to compete in female sports, and toward prominent intersex athletes like South African runner Caster Semenya. Why? Because so long as they've got you on your heels, making difficult judgment calls on individuals with,
Well, because there are tons of cis people in women's sports who are getting affected by the policies put in place to keep trans people out. Like, there are a significant amount of cis women getting booted out of professional sports because their testosterone levels are too high and it's all natural. Like, it's just, that's how it is. Tons of cis women are going to lose out if you try to put these barriers in place to keep trans people out. It's just, that's how it is.
medically complicated intersex conditions, they've succeeded in drawing your attention away from making easy calls on unquestionably male athletes, like 2022 NCAA Division I women's swimming and diving champion Leah Thomas. They shift the focus.
This guy has the conservative goal phrenology. Yeah, this is a guy who back in 2020 was laughed out of the academic community for like trying to insist as like a big podium issue that sex and gender are the same thing and sex is binary. He's been laughed out of the academic sphere. He won't be hired anymore as a doctor or as a physician. He's basically just a mouthpiece for the right now who has a PhD.
Focus to intersex to distract from transgender. But the existence of a tiny handful of intersex cases is completely irrelevant.
So the funny thing as well is he's desperately trying to pretend like this is just some lefty activist issue, but the science is settled. Like, there's no amount of PragerU videos that's going to change the scientific procedure and the scientific process. Like, you can't erase what the academic and medical community knows. So as much as they want to, like, complain about how activists are the ones saying this, it's actually doctors and scientists, and they're the ones making these guidelines. So tough luck. It doesn't matter how much money you put into your propaganda and how much you whine in your videos and how many views those videos get. The scientists already know. You're not going to trick them.
Relevant to the issue of allowing males in female sports, prisons, and restrooms.
Yeah. Also, if we shouldn't care about the tiny number of intersex people, then why should we care about the tiny number of trans people in sports? Very good point, Fortnite.
Policy to exclude males who identify as women, or trans women, from female-only spaces isn't complicated. That's because trans women are unambiguously male, and so the chances that a doctor incorrectly recorded their sex at birth...
That is not true. Like, there are trans women out there who are intersex, actually. There's a fair amount of them. In fact, being intersex directly not correlates, or yeah, no, it correlates, not causates, but correlates very strongly with being trans. Like, if you're intersex, there is a very high likelihood that you end up identifying as trans down the road. Yeah, that's extremely common. So, as a matter of fact, many trans women are not male if you look at their biological sex. They're intersex.
Are essentially zero. Therefore, any transgender policy designed to protect female spaces need only specify that participants must have been recorded female on their original birth certificates. Or, if no birth certificate listing sex is available, biology, not an individual's feelings, will determine whether the participant would be allowed to compete as a male or female.
It's funny that they just suggest look at the assigned sex on the original birth certificate. But the funny thing is, when this all gets put into policy by Republican politicians, it ends up being child genital inspections. like in Florida and a few of the other Republican states that have done this, where now if you're only if you're a girl, of course, because they only care about the girl sports, only if you're a girl, you have to have your genitals verified by a medical physician as part of your physical in order to participate in any sports for school. That's the actual policy they're advocating for, but they won't say it because obviously saying we need to have mandatory child genital inspections doesn't look good in their propaganda video meant to get normies on board with transphobia, you know? Like you don't want to get people, like, you don't want to take the mask off and reveal too late how far you have to go to live up to this worldview that they're pushing in their videos.
Crafting effective intersex policies is more complicated, but a much less pressing issue for protecting the integrity of women's sports. Individual organizations can decide for themselves which criteria should be used to keep female spaces safe and, in the context of sport.
So to give you an idea of how conservatives will react if any institution goes against what they think is best, look at how they've reacted literally every time these institutions have allowed trans people to participate. And on top of that, look at how they've reacted literally any time an individual, like, athlete has had a political belief. Do you remember the football player who kneeled during the national anthem? Kaepernick? Colin Kaepernick? That, like, the right screamed and demanded would be fired. The first ever mainstream cancellation ever, the best example of cancel culture ever, was a guy kneeled for the national anthem, and millions of Trump supporters and conservatives demanded he be fired, lose his job, and be homeless. And some insisted he be arrested and executed. That wasn't too uncommon back then either. So that'll give you an idea of what will happen to any of these institutions if they allow trans people to compete. And they have. The ones that do absolutely get this treatment.
Safe and fair. It is imperative, however, that such policies be rooted in properties of the body and not one's identity, because identity is not germane to issues of fairness and safety. You can identify as anything you like, but your identity does not determine biological reality. And the reality is...
Well, the fact is that you guys are trying to ban treatments that make someone's identity match more, or sorry, make someone's physical body match more with their identity. Like, on enough hormones for long enough, a trans woman is physically on par with a cis woman athletically. So, like, sure, that would be the case if you guys win in banning these treatments and access to it.
That sex in humans is immutable and binary. No amount of activist hysteria is ever going to change that.
Ooh, what a biting line. Ooh, what an epic own on the lefties. I'm sorry, though, but the entirety of the scientific consensus disagrees with you. It's not the activist lefties. Like, you can say that as much as you like. You can epically own the lefties with that as much as you like. But we've got literally the entire scientific consensus. The same with evolution. The same with there not being a flat Earth, like so many conservatives are jumping on board with flat Earth lately. The same with vaccines not causing autism. The same with there being global warming. The same with the Earth revolving around the sun. There have been very wealthy, powerful people demanding that the truth on these issues be suppressed for a very long time. But scientists and academics have always been the ones to, come to the truth in the end. And they have. And these insanely wealthy... Well, we actually know that PragerU is funded by oil companies. We know that the oil companies that fund PragerU are not going to be able to throw enough money at the truth to make it go away.
I'm Colin Wright, PhD in evolutionary biology and fellow at the Manhattan Institute for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video.
Also, evolutionary biology is not the line of biology that would be, like, specializing in this area. It's somewhat related, but he is not, like, an expert on biological sex by any means. Something I need you guys to understand is the desperation at which many conservatives cling to their ideology. Recently, I put out a video debunking some more Blair White bullshittery, and I brought up an example of her just outright lying about cervical cancer in trans women. You see, a lot of Blair White's content is all about taking an example of a trans woman saying that they have a thing that cis women have or do a thing that cis women do, and then saying, isn't it so ridiculous and stupid that this Tesla thinks that they have periods or that they can get cervical cancer? What a dumb bitch. Like that's her content pretty much. Like and then like her audience claps and eats it up like seals. So in one of her videos a while ago, and I am pretty sure I'm the only person to call it out, she responded to a TikTok in which someone who had bottom surgery and was a trans woman talked about getting their getting checked for cervical cancer, getting like pap smears for cervical cancer, like getting checkups. And Blair's whole video was all about how that is insane. Trans people can't get cervical cancer. What are you talking about? Oh my God, that's so crazy. And she happens to link a page from the Canadian Cancer Society. This is cancer.ca, cancer information, and it's as a trans woman, do I need to get screened for cervical cancer? She clips this, and she only shows this. She clips it only showing this, conveniently cutting it off right before this paragraph. She shows just this bit. If you're a trans woman, you may not have given much thought to pap tests and cervical cancer. And if you haven't, that makes a fair amount of sense. After all, in order to get cervical cancer, you need to have a cervix. That is the organ that connects the vagina to the uterus. If you're a trans woman and have not had bottom surgery, you aren't at risk for cervical cancer. I went to this page and decided to read the rest because this line that she included kind of seemed a little off to me. It seemed like there's going to be a but statement. And sure enough, if, however, you are a trans woman who has had bottom surgery to create a vaginoplasty, and possibly a cervix, there's a very small risk that you can develop cancer in the tissues of your neovagina or neocervix. The risk depends on the type of surgery you've had and the type of tissue used to create your vagina and cervix and your personal health history. Talk to your healthcare provider to figure out your specific cancer screening needs as part of your overall pelvic health following surgery. So, Blair White demonstrably clearly lied about a very dangerous thing to lie about for a political narrative, and I pointed it out, and it is just undeniable. I read a comment from one of her fans who commented on that video recently, and do you guys want to know what their reaction was? It's not a real cervix, it's just random flesh they've molded into one. You can get cancer anywhere, Lamau. She didn't lie about shit. Nice try. You need to understand that most of the people who are watching this, at least for now, are not going to be convinced. And I've kind of come to terms with that a long time ago, that no matter how good my arguments are, it can only be a crack in the armor of the indoctrination that they've been fed. They really don't want to believe that their favorite right-wing YouTuber is a person who's lying to them for money and for political gain. It's not convenient to them. And so, yeah, a lot of people will see the SciShow video and see all of those scientific studies, and they'll see the PragerU video, and the PragerU video will just sound better to them, and it'll sound more intuitively smart to them, I guess, and they'll go with that instead, because the internet has made reality more preferential than ever.